Welcome back to the channel Future Speed Hub 2025. Today we will talk about one of the most interesting tanks that has its own special place in the history of armored vehicles, the T1 Cunningham. This was not just a simple tank but a starting point that helped shape the evolution of armored warfare for the United States in the early 20th century. While modern battle tanks are equipped with cutting-edge technology, powerful engines, advanced armor, and highly sophisticated weapon systems, the T1 Cunningham stands as a reminder of where it all began and how the journey of American tank development took its first steps. The T1 Cunningham project started in the 1920s, a period when many countries were experimenting with different designs to understand what role tanks would play in future wars. World War I had shown the importance of armored vehicles in breaking trench warfare stalemates, so naturally, countries like Britain, France, and the United States tried to come up with their own innovations. The T1 Cunningham was essentially America's first real attempt to design and build a tank from the ground up, rather than borrowing or modifying existing foreign models. It was produced by the Cunningham Company, which is where the tank got its name, and the design showed a combination of lightweight, mobility, and a focus on reconnaissance duties rather than heavy combat. The T1 Cunningham was classified as a light tank, and it weighed around 8 tons, which made it relatively easy to transport and maneuver compared to the heavier machines being tested in Europe. It was powered by a gasoline engine that gave it a speed of about 20 miles per hour, which at that time was considered fairly impressive for an armored vehicle. The armor thickness was between 6 to 16 millimeters, providing protection against small arms fire but not heavy weapons. This shows that the tank was never meant to take direct hits from anti-tank guns or artillery but rather to scout enemy positions, support infantry, and exploit weak points. In terms of armament, the T1 Cunningham was usually fitted with a 37mm main gun, accompanied by a coaxial machine gun. The 37mm gun was small by modern standards, but back in the 1920s, it was a respectable weapon capable of destroying light fortifications and enemy vehicles of the time. The placement of the gun inside a fully rotating turret was also significant, as it gave the tank a flexible field of fire and set the stage for future designs. Many tanks before it had limited traverse weapons, but the Cunningham's turret concept became the global standard for tank development. Even though the T1 Cunningham never saw combat, its role in American military history is extremely important. Only a few prototypes were built, and the design did not enter mass production. However, the lessons learned from this vehicle helped the U.S. Army and its engineers understand what was needed in a tank. Problems with reliability, mechanical issues, and weak armor highlighted the shortcomings, but they also gave valuable insight for the future. In other words, without the Cunningham, tanks like the M3 Stuart, the M4 Sherman, and eventually the powerful Abrams series might not have developed as effectively as they did. When discussing the value and price of the T1 Cunningham in today's world, it's important to note that it was never mass-produced, so it is more of a historical artifact than a battlefield machine. If one of the surviving prototypes were to be sold at an auction or placed in a museum, its value would be determined by its rarity, historical significance, and condition. Military collectors and history museums would consider it priceless, as it represents the very first step in America's armored legacy. In monetary terms, experts estimate that such a vehicle could easily fetch several $1 million if it ever came on the private market, simply because of its uniqueness and the fact that so few examples remain. For tank enthusiasts, the T1 Cunningham is fascinating not because of its combat record, but because of its symbolism. It represents ambition, trial and error, and the willingness to experiment in a time when the role of tanks was still uncertain. While larger and more powerful tanks were being built overseas, the United States chose to start small and learn gradually. This decision may have delayed their tank development compared to European powers, but it also allowed the U.S. to study and refine concepts before committing to large-scale production. Today, when we compare the T1 Cunningham with modern machines, the difference is almost unbelievable. Modern tanks weigh upwards of 60 tons, travel at high speeds, feature composite armor, night vision, laser targeting, computerized fire control systems, and devastating weapons capable of destroying enemies at several kilometers. But every great journey has to start somewhere, and for the United States, it all began with the modest but significant T1 Cunningham. That is all for today's detailed look at the T1 Cunningham, a light tank that laid the foundation for American armored warfare. It may not have been the strongest or most advanced machine of its time, but its historical importance makes it unforgettable. Thanks for watching Future Speed Hub 2025, and I see you next video.